Hello, and thank you for attending today's webinar. We will begin the presentation in approximately 1 minute. Welcome everyone to the webinar, GulfMark Protects Business Critical Data on Land and at Sea. My name is Paul Sears, and I am a Solutions Architect with AWS Partner Team, and I will be your host and moderator for today's session. I am joined by Kevin Adams, Global IT Infrastructure Manager at GulfMark, and by Silas Simon, Director of Customer Success and Sales at Dhruva. When you join today's webinar, you selected to join by either phone call or your computer's audio. If for any reason you would like to change your audio selection, you can do so by accessing your audio pane in the control panel. From this control panel, you will also have the opportunity to submit questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions panel. We will collect the questions and address as many as we can during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. Also, at the end of today's event is a brief survey. Please stay connected until the end of the broadcast and submit your feedback as your opinions count. Lastly, the PowerPoint presentation will be available through SlideShare along with a recording of the webinar on YouTube via an email that will be sent 2 to 3 days after the conclusion of this event. So keep an eye out for the follow-up email sent to the address you provided. So today we are going to work backwards from our customer, as Kevin from GulfMark will share how they leverage Dhruva and AWS to streamline and protect their data. Silas from Dhruva will talk about Dhruva Phoenix, how it is used to access, protect, and restore critical data on site or on the move. And finally, I will talk about AWS and storage options that are available. Time permitting, we will then have Q&A. I'm now handing this over to Kevin from GulfMark to share their story.
Thank you, Paul. If I could say a little bit about myself before we get started. I'm titled the Global IT Infrastructure Manager at GulfMark Offshore. I was brought on by my CIO to bring innovation we're already familiar with in data centers to other business units. This task has a heavy emphasis on getting IT involved with other departments' workloads and the leverage of shared global IT resources where possible. And today, I'll be talking you through the adoption of cloud and our journey with AWS and Dhruva specifically. There we are. So this slide says 1990, but GulfMark's story starts actually back in the 1950s as a pipeline engineering firm. In its lifetime, the company has gone through several rounds of diversification, working with real estate, wholesale air conditioning, pollution control, and finally, oil industry support. We first entered the OSV, or offshore services vessel market, in the 70s by acquiring stakes in other companies based in Louisiana. This, along with construction, dock, and terminal facilities in Delaware and growing construction shipyard endeavors, created a wealth of seasoned expertise in maritime industries. Oil shortages in the 70s drove investments at the time towards energy independence, and the company responded by supporting Alaskan pipelines, DOE strategic petroleum reserve storage programs, and a general offshore energy market development. In the 90s, the company purchased a marine division of Offshore Logistics Incorporated and formed the nucleus of what became GulfMark Offshore. This solidified the company as a direct operating entity in the international oilfield services industry. Since that time, GulfMark Offshore has operated more than 90 technologically sophisticated, high-specification vessels. These best-in-class vessels have allowed us to maintain a high level of utilization and revenue levels above those of older, less sophisticated fleets. So I want to talk about the why of a cloud journey instead of just a timeline. I think these conversations get stuck on the when. So let's walk through it. As an IT guy, I generally need to create IT stuff. I need servers, cables, SANs, firewalls, data centers, load balancers, things like that. But I thought about it, and is that what my CEO needs? Is that what shareholders need? Is that what our customers are really asking us for? The realization is that we aren't in the business of infrastructure proliferation. No matter how exciting unboxing a new widget is, IT infra isn't our organization's goal. And with that in mind, we've chosen to answer our IT challenges with as-a-service tools many times in the past few years. This has proved beneficial in allowing our small internal IT team to meet global challenges. Beginning in 2009, we retired all of our on-premise Exchange servers by migrating to Office 365. We removed a significant amount of management overhead for our IT staff. In 2014, we moved our SAP environment from a hosted data center to AWS, realizing a cost savings of about 30%. In Q1 of 2017, we selected Dhruva Phoenix for cloud backup, but I won't give too many spoilers there since that's kind of the focus of this presentation. Later in 2017, we completed a paperless accounting initiative. We automated many processes and leveraged S3 to store once large file cabinets in the cloud. Note the pictures in this slide. This was a large filing room with cabinets about shoulder high. It was filled to the hilt at the beginning, and today only 2 of the 15 or so cabinets remain, mostly storing Post-its and staples and other sundries. In addition to that, in December of 2017, we exited an old school load balanced IIS cluster for our public facing website for a modern serverless topology. We leveraged AWS technologies like Lambda, CloudFront, S3, Route 53, Cognito, and RDS to realize about a 95% cost savings while improving durability in the process. And as of March of this year, we began a general infrastructure migration of all remaining premise-based servers. We hope to add resiliency and management capability we could not achieve in siloed hardware stacks spread in each global office location. So the problem landscape. The most dense pieces of shared data is our SAP environment, and that's already hosted in AWS. The other large file shares are generally specific to a single site's operation, and these files include both operational data sets needed for day-to-day activities and legacy data ripe for a future move these old files to archive storage type project. GulfMark has never been heavy from an operational overhead perspective, and this shows in our svelte IT staffing. Each site's single IT engineer plays double duty of assisting both office locations and the regional fleet his office manages. It follows that every hour of an engineer's time is precious. And this also means that if he's unavailable, it falls to the rest of the global team to assist where they can. Having harmonized tools and processes across regions enables this type of collaboration. And third is the backup solutions. So GulfMark used a mix by region of server backup technologies. The first is Live Vault that I inherited. I found it surprisingly modern in its vision, but a bit lacking in its ability to deliver on its goals. It used an in-guest agent, leveraging VSS and quarter-hour Delta backups, and it stored this data in Live Vault's cloud-hosted environment. They augmented storing this data off-site with physical caching appliances for our corporate office to speed the backup and restore operations. All other sites suffered under a slower remote backup and restore to Live Vault's cloud offering. Sites not using Live Vault generally had some mix of backup exec and Veeam. Veeam produces stable backups of virtual machines, but the resultant data was generally more than we were ready to contend with. And so the regions were often using backup exec to directly sweep restore points produced by Veeam to tape in a disk-to-disk-to-tape topology. This practice works, but it's very easy to cause restore failures and weirdness in Veeam if all the data it expects to be available isn't live at the time a job runs. Testing of the restores often involves simply retrieving the Veeam blobs from tape and marking the test a success. And since this test never resulted in a file that the end user could interact with, is the resultant Excel document corrupt or not, we couldn't accept that as a successful test going forward. I'm aware now that Veeam has the ability to interact with tapes directly. However, at the time of testing, that was not a mature feature, and I don't have experience with it. So All of those different backup solutions in general are reasonable, but the real problem is that we had so many different methods across the globe. Getting favorable results for an end user required assistance from a singular engineer in that region who knew his specific solution, and it also contended with the individual foibles of those different solutions. The odds generally were stacked against us. So we set out on a selection process. In our selection process, I created a short wish list, 3 items. It had to measure up favorably against our previous spending on backup. It had to avoid solutions that tied IT team up for longer than needed to manage and maintain. And third, we favored solutions back-ended in AWS. And so I questioned each provider in turn on how they helped me leverage cloud and specifically AWS if they could. I researched many products, and with those 3 things in mind, any who could not meet at least 2 of them were not really evaluated further. And so I pared down the options, vetted solutions from Cloudberry, Veeam, Dhruva, and even the possibility of just globalizing LiveVault. Cloud solutions have flexibility, but I've learned that the solution often has undisclosed costs. And I worked with each solution provider to talk about what their product would cost me, not just to buy, but to host and run, the TCO. This ballooned the cost of most solutions by about 50%. However, Dhruva commoditizes their underlying compute and storage into their credit cost, and this proved to be a benefit under analysis. Final selection of Dhruva was driven by 3 factors. Minimal IT effort was Dhruva. Several of the other proposed solutions would have required many manual steps to deploy, engineering the storage that needed to connect to them, and they created a considerable effort to maintain over time. Dhruva Phoenix gave GulfMark a way to back up on-premise data that didn't require a lot of effort to connect all the pieces. Basically, deployment of file agents and configuring backup policies is all that you really need to get you started protecting your environments. The second item is one control vector. With Dhruva Phoenix, our entire staff was using one solution. So this offered us a single product we could learn about, we could help each other, and we could monitor and control together. And third is the use of AWS. So AWS at this time has an unmatched scale, scope, and durability. In ranking of infrastructure as a service providers, AWS is decidedly the top player. The gap is so large right now that I haven't really found a compelling reason to pick any second place contender. So this is a map of our data distribution across the globe. It represents our offices. US is actually 2 offices, but on this map it's combined to 1 dot. The data distribution of each global site is several large file shares containing unstructured departmental data and user home directories for that site. In addition to that, it's composed of small application servers, small database servers, and other utility servers, things like badge access reader servers. When you stack all those individually, they're not much data, but it's also not a trivial amount of data to transfer into the cloud. A key benefit of Dhruva, backed by AWS, is that this data didn't really have to leave the region to leverage back up to the cloud. My CIO likes to tell our UK office the cloud is over Aberdeen. In truth, it's over Ireland and London, but that's generally close enough for us. In the end, we protected 6 offices with 3 Dhruva regions in the US, UK, and Singapore, respectively. So from there, an originally unintended use sprung up. About 3 months after deploying Dhruva for onshore backup, my engineer from the UK asked about using Dhruva for his vessels. He was tired of sneakernet swapping of external USB drives with his UK fleet. Often he'd go on a vessel to find the backup had failed because the crew on board had unplugged the drive, or they needed to unplug it temporarily for troubleshooting and didn't plug it back in the correct USB port. It would get mapped the wrong drive letter and end up failing the backup because it couldn't find its target. He attempted to maintain a monthly swap of those USB drives, but the vessel schedules aren't always accommodating to that. On your day when you're free to go visit a vessel and swap the drive, maybe the vessel hits the port, refuels, and turns right around. It doesn't give you that opportunity. Storing and cataloging the USB drives also became an inventory issue and a source of scrutiny by our audit teams. We do what we can to stay right by audit, but we also don't have a need to to court extra scrutiny from our audit teams. So when he asked about Dhruva, our initial concern was that generally connections to offshore fleets aren't speedy. And we were afraid that it would be painful, especially during the seeding portion of a beginning backup on our ships. But we decided to test against 2 UK vessels. And it turns out it took about 5 days for the initial seed of just under 100 gigabytes to back up those 2 vessels. We found that after the initial seed, we could do Delta backups twice a day, and those backups completed in under 30 minutes. With Dhruva, using Dhruva in this way, we were able to respond to backup and restore requests no matter where the vessel was really at. And in addition to that, if we needed to request data from the vessel on shore for review or something like that, we didn't actually have to traverse the VSAT connection to do it. We were able to request that file out of the recent Dhruva backup onto shore in a quick, efficient manner without saturating our VSAT connection to gather data. In an extension of benefits includes the removal of backup exec licensing, centralized historical record of vessel data in Dhruva, and it significantly lowered my engineer's workload to manage backup for his fleet. No more sneakernet. With the early successes in the UK fleet, we next deployed Dhruva to the rest of his fleet and continued from there with our North Sea fleet managed by our Norway office. We plan to leverage it against the fleets in the Gulf of Mexico and Singapore as well as we add servers to those fleets. So the specific benefits to GulfMark are increased operational efficiencies translated into tangible savings across GulfMark's many data centers and ships. We eliminated costs associated with software licenses, tapes, tape drives, and tape vaulting services, co-location, some replication went away, data center utilities, AC, electricity, heating and cooling, and some administrative staff overhead was removed, as well as the cost of those swappable USB drives. We reduced the storage cost all told by about 35-fold, and we reduced the time required to back up and restore by about 50%. In addition to this, we found that we have a 100% adoption rate with our IT staff around the world, due mostly to Dhruva Phoenix's general ease of use. And the road ahead. So we look now to extend our use of cloud services with continued cloud migration as part of a zero infrastructure initiative. We're embracing serverless frameworks where possible to get away from costly monolithic services. We'd prefer to pay for things when we need them, and when we don't need them and they're idle, we want the cost to be near zero. Serverless allows us to achieve that generally. And lastly, we're testing Dhruva Apollo as a way to protect the workloads after we migrate them to EC2. And with that, I'd now like to pass the presentation over to Silas from Dhruva to walk through the Dhruva's platform benefits and offerings.
Thank you, Kevin. So as we've helped Kevin from GulfMark to modernize the data protection solutions, I kind of want to walk everybody through of where Dhruva can help, not just from the server aspect, but also moving forward from the server into any type of data. When most people think digital transformation, they think of first is virtualization or mobility or new devices. Just like if you remember the picture that Kevin was showing, digital transformation actually happened from converting everything on papers and things like that, or everything in their office, moving the data, digitizing that and moving into the cloud or any other place. Could be virtualization, etc. But one of the key aspects that people miss is how do we protect the most important asset of an organization, which is data, right? And when you look at the top 5 or top 10 S&P 500 companies, the top 7 are tech companies. Surprising, right? With how data is becoming more and more important. And most organizations today, just like you, are using data to make decisions on business aspects. So let's talk about data transformation. When you look at about 10 years ago, everything was based on either application or hardware or data. It was all segregated. But today, fast forward today, when you look at the movement into the cloud, it's estimated that about 40 zettabytes of data will be existing by 2020. And all these things are possible with the move to cloud, the move to subscription economy, the move to software as a service. And this might paint a very good picture for you when you look at this, where data center is no longer the center of data. 10 or 20 years ago, everything was on mainframes or everything within the data center. And 50% of the data center data is now existing outside the firewall, and by 2020 is expected to go over that, right? Data once, which was on servers, started moving on to endpoints, started moving to branch offices as companies start to rapidly expand in this beautiful economy. Adoption of cloud services like Office 365, Google, Salesforce, Box, and so on and so forth have tried to move this data outside the data center. And then most importantly, the public cloud, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service to protect that data. So question is, how do we bring control to the data outside the data center? And why is this important is because of the nuances of data protection today. Earlier, it was okay to just do a disk-to-disk to tape or just keep a copy on a USB. But today, with there is a 250% increase in data regulations like GDPR coming to effect. There is a complete revamp of HIPAA happening within the US. Within the next 2 years, you'll see a complete change in regulations as well, which forces organizations to understand what type of data has been protected, what is the retention towards that data, and is there any way to identify where if there is any PII information, etc. And not just from the data protection aspect, but also from the primary data. On second piece that is important is cloud applications like Office 365, Salesforce, etc., which was recently adopted in the last 5 years or so. Not everybody is actually protecting that data. 70% of the cloud applications are not protected or backed up. That leaves a huge risk to the organization because it could expose issues like ransomware. For example, Office 365 OneDrive, if somebody gets ransomware, that person shares with somebody else and so on and so forth. Very simple to spread ransomware across the organization just through a sharing and collaboration platform. And when you look at ransomware, there's a 600% increase year over year. The recent attacks is still lingering around in everybody's minds, city of Atlanta, right? And then on top of that, there is legal compliance. How do we put users on legal hold? How do we capture server data in a very efficient way? How do we ensure that if we are choosing cloud, that no vendor has got access to that data from the back end in case of a subpoena? So when you take a step back and look at legacy data protection, like a disk-to-disk or a disk-to-disk-to-tape, or even a disk-to-cloud that was going on, most of the solutions were only built to either protect virtual machines or physical servers. Just like how I mentioned earlier, data is now transporting or moving outside the data center. And now you have no idea, not just from a protection aspect, but also management aspect of who's sharing what data with whom. Did somebody expose the data outside the organization by just sharing a file from Google Drive or OneDrive into some external person, which is a very confidential file? How do you track that? And on top of that, if somebody deletes it or there is ransomware, how do you ensure that you can recover from that data, right? Cloud Ops is not protected. So, and then when you go to the server side, you understand that traditional backup and DR are complicated. This is a typical picture that we see with almost 70% of the organizations where there is a backup server. There is a dedupe appliance or a disk library. There is a removable media and somebody has to manually go and replace those tapes. And maybe some people don't use tapes, but the folks who use tapes, they have to send it to Iron Mountain or something of that sort. When you look at the overall copy of the data, there is about 10.7 copies of the same data maintained for each location. Why is that? You need to do a full backup once every week There is multiple incrementals being copied, etc. And on top of that, it's difficult to manage, and there is increased hardware costs that people usually do not consider in a total TCO calculation when considering a backup solution cost. Just like how Kevin mentioned, when you look at the TCO, or the total cost of ownership, one of the key pieces is the backup software may be cheap, but there is all these other components which increases the cost significantly. So how do we solve this? With the cloud, we bring this opportunity to go ahead and modernize your backup solution with zero infrastructure. Most importantly, it's predictable enterprise SLAs. Leveraging AWS, we're able to go ahead and give 7 nines of data availability as well as data durability guarantee. And that is important to know, because if something goes wrong with your data and you are managing with a legacy solution, there is no guarantee. You're spending your weekends to come and upgrade those things, spending your weekends in case there is a disaster. That's where Dhruva comes into picture and takes care of the whole gambit and tells that, hey, here is your guarantee, and we will protect your data, and we are responsible for data. So 1 year down the line, 7 years down the line, anytime, if you choose to recover the data. On top of that, because we are able to leverage AWS, it's infinite and elastic scalable, and it allows us to go ahead and have a single customer using 10 petabytes of data, or it could be 3 terabytes of data. It doesn't matter where it is. We are absolutely able to scale because of the cloud infrastructure. On top of that, just like how Kevin mentioned, if you have multiple sites or you have across the globe, how do you have visibility over your data? And on top of that, who has access to that data? So many of them use cloud or try to use cloud gateways or something of that sort. Who has access to the data? Who's holding the key? Can the vendor reset the password? Those are questions you want to ask when choosing a solution. And finally, when you with the cloud, it is a pay-as-you-scale pricing, which allows you to go ahead and buy a solution, as well as not live with the solution, like in a hardware case, where you have to buy hardware for peak performance or peak storage. So let's talk about what Dhruva can do from a complete platform perspective. As a platform, we've got 3 microservices: InSync, Phoenix, and Apollo. InSync protects your user data, could belong to your desktop or laptop or Office 365, G Suite, Box, Salesforce. InSync also does OS migrations. InSync also does remote wipe-off of your laptops in case it's stolen or lost, or including your mobile devices, which is iOS and Android. Phoenix, which Kevin presented about, talks about data centers and branch offices, physical servers, databases, VMware, Hyper-V, NAS, and then we're also protecting Nutanix in the near future. And on top of that, we also have Apollo, which is protecting your workloads within AWS, not just protecting, but also helping you manage, move the data from an S3 to a Glacier, etc. Some of the use cases go deeper into not just backup and recovery, but go deeper into search and e-discovery, compliance and monitoring, data forensics, identifying if there is any ransomware attack. We call that anomaly detection internally, where you should be able to go ahead and find out if there is an attack, and then tells you what's the last known good snapshot to recover from, and also tells you which are the files which are affected. In case of a disaster, most organizations have to wait for 4 hours or 10 hours to restore a VMware machine or a Hyper-V machine or anything of that sort. With Dhruva, we are able to go ahead and spin up those VMs in the cloud right away with 10-minute SLAs to ensure there is business continuity. Business is not affected. And on top of that, we've made DR available at a very easy to manage and low cost so that DR can be made available to everybody rather than using those expensive solutions, and then it becomes a difficult consumption aspect. When it comes to Dhruva, a little bit about Dhruva is we are a rated #1 company by Gartner since the last 5+ years. And we have 4,000+ customers. We have 55 petabyte plus data under management. This is post dedupe. We only charge for what you consume post dedupe. Most important piece to remember is we only do one full backup incremental forever. That is a key piece to how we reduce your bandwidth and storage costs by over 80%. We're one of the top 5 AWS storage partners as well. And when you look at some of the logos, doesn't matter which industry they belong to, they have all the same common problems of data protection and management. With that being said, I will pass this to Paul Sears from AWS to walk you through the options on AWS with regards to backup and recovery.
Thank you, Silas, and thank you, Kevin. And again, my name is Paul Sears. I'm a partner solutions architect with AWS, and I'm going to talk about options for backup and recovery on AWS. Organizations face typical challenges with backup and recovery. Many organizations struggle to manage a manual process around backups, which frequently means they aren't done consistently. It is also expensive to build and maintain and scale on-premises storage systems and backup infrastructure. And then you have compliance requirements. They often result in increased complexity as well as higher costs required for long-term storing and archiving of your data. When you use AWS for your backup and recovery, you can solve all the previous challenges. With AWS services, as well as partner solutions such as Dhruva, you can implement a backup solution that integrates into multiple AWS services and ensures your data is backed up automatically and securely. You don't need to build and maintain an expensive and complicated backup infrastructure, since you can store all of your data using AWS storage services. AWS storage services such as Amazon S3, they scale automatically and are practically limitless in the amount of data you can store, and you're only paying for what you're using, so you can better manage your costs. AWS has 3 primary storage services that are ideal for storing your data. Amazon S3 is our object store that provides encryption of data at rest and in transit, and more importantly, it is extremely durable with 11 nines of durability. And when you're storing hundreds of terabytes or petabytes of data, the durability of that data is extremely important, as your files will remain unchanged for as long as you store them. Alongside of Amazon S3 is Amazon Glacier. Glacier offers the same 11 nines of a durability as S3, but is really designed for archival or cold storage. It is very inexpensive to store data into and is ideal for storing archives and backups long-term to meet compliance requirements. You also have the ability to prevent archives from being changed once they're stored in Glacier. Amazon EBS is our elastic block store, and these are basically the storage volumes or disks that are attached to your server instances. EBS supports generating snapshots which can then be stored in S3 or Glacier, and which can be used to recover a server instance or data on that instance to a particular point in time. In addition to AWS services, AWS has thousands of partners that can provide solutions to nearly any problem you might have. Dhruva is an APN storage competency partner, which means they provide proven technology and/or implementation capabilities for a variety of use cases, including backup and recovery operations to, from, and within the AWS environment. And as you have learned earlier, Dhruva can address any of your use cases to ensure that your data is backed up and protected. When you store your data in AWS, your data is secure. Security is job 0 at AWS, and we are certified and accredited by a wide range of regulators and industry bodies. This is just a partial list of some key bodies that have either certified us or we have a workbook of guidance showing you how to validate an AWS environment against these standards. For example, PCI DSS compliance is very important for many businesses and organizations, as well as HIPAA regulated workloads. So we can support you BAA as well. We also have FedRAMP compliance in our GovCloud, which allows you to run special workloads and ensure your data is secure and protected there. So today you've learned how Dhruva Phoenix on AWS can benefit your enterprise by reducing the complexity and time to do backups and restores of your important data. It also protects your data no matter where it resides and allows you to consolidate your data into a single pane of glass. And now we have some time for some questions and answers. As a reminder, you can submit questions via the control panel. And also there'll be a survey at the conclusion of this webinar. So please remain on to complete it, as your feedback is very valuable to us. So now let me go through some questions here. I have an initial question that I'm going to ask Silas at Dhruva. Silas, does Dhruva support Office 365 backups, which also include SharePoint, OneDrive, and emails?
Yes, we do. So it's a single license that actually protects all the three components of Office 365. Interestingly, the same license, the way we've designed it, also supports G Suite as well. So it's a per user license, and that can support all these three.
Great. Okay. Thank you. I actually have another question for Dhruva, and this is around data compliance. So maybe you can answer, how can Dhruva help an organization to be GDPR enabled?
That's a very good question. So with GDPR, there are major 5 components, one being data sovereignty, second being right to erasure, the third being the consent or acceptance to go ahead and share the data as far as PII for marketing purposes, etc. So one of the key pieces that organizations have a difficult time finding is, first of all, where is the PII data and what is defined as a PII data, or PII stands for personally identifiable information. So what Dhruva does is, while we back up the data, we will capture that information on the secondary data, right, which is during the backup, rather than slowing down the machines doing all the scanning at the primary storage. We do it at the secondary storage and understand where there is PII data, etc. And then we'll notify the admins of the organization that there is non-compliant PII data. And we will be able to proactively show them the data so that before there is a data breach, you can protect that data or delete that data or whatever action that you need to take, so that you can avoid the situation of the GDPR fines, which could range anywhere from 4% of the company's global annual turnover, or it could be 20 million euros, whichever is higher. In addition, because Dhruva leverages AWS, we can actually use the storage regions in that location. So data in Europe will remain in Europe. Data in APAC will remain in APAC. Our data in US will remain in US, the way we actually designed our solution.
Excellent. Thank you. So maybe along these lines about now we're moving into protection here. How does Dhruva protect the backups from being affected by ransomware? This is actually a big topic that Kevin even touched on a little bit earlier.
That's a very good question too. Yeah, I'm happy to take that. One of the key pieces that you notice is ransomware is actually getting smarter, or the people who are writing ransomware or malwares are getting smarter. They understand that they affect their primary data. IT admins usually can just go ahead and recover from a backup and they're done, right? So when you look at when ransomware is affected in Boeing recently, just around the same time like City of Atlanta was not able to come out of it at all for over 3 weeks, versus Boeing was able to come out right away. The reason being the robust backups, and backups being able to being written in such a way that ransomware cannot affect the backups. Why is that important? When you look at, there's a huge forum that goes around Veeam and ransomware. Veeam data has been wiped off and things like that. It's not just Veeam. All traditional solutions were written where data and metadata were written together, and therefore the data of the backup itself was being wiped off or held ransom. And that's where the ransomware writers or coders are actually targeting primary data plus the backup data and locking it down, so organizations have no other option but go and pay ransom via bitcoins or whatever be the case. But Dhruva, on the other hand, dedups the data, backs up the data, and then calls a process called as data sharding, where data goes into S3, metadata goes into Dynamo database. Because we segregate the data and metadata and then use a snapshot technology, it protects the backup from being affected by ransomware.
Okay, that's actually refreshing to hear how you do it a little differently than some other backup solutions out there. So what about the size of data? If I'm an organization, how much data can I actually back up with Dhruva?
So there is no limitation at all of how much data you can back up. We've seen single customers having about 14 petabytes of data being transferred, and we have customers ranging with 1 terabyte of data. So it really depends on the bandwidth, and just like how AWS does not have a limitation, you can have petabytes and petabytes of data of Netflix in AWS, or it could be any other AWS customer that uses. Just like the same way, we're able to transfer as much as data possible. Now, in the past, transferring data for backup, cloud was not as viable. But in the last few years, coupled with the increased bandwidth, coupled with the cloud offerings and available storage regions from AWS, we also do deduplication, and only unique data is actually sent into the cloud. Therefore, for backup or secondary storage, Dhruva becomes very viable with the cloud offering. And therefore, there is no limitation, and you should be able to see petabytes or terabytes of data being completed within a few days.
Okay, thank you for explaining that. So I think there's a question around licensing or credits. Can you talk about how credits work with Dhruva Phoenix?
Sure. I see that question come in very commonly. So with Phoenix, what we do is it's the industry's first licensing model where there is no end date. Why is that important? Because, say, for example, if you buy any SaaS application, there is a start date and there is an end date. If you do not deploy for the first 3 months, you still are going to pay for the whole 12 months that you subscribe for as a SaaS offering, and you got to write off the expenses for the first 3 months, and it's basically a loss. Dhruva, on the other hand, says, here we only charge you for what you consume post-dedupe, and these credits never expire. If you're familiar with how an AT&T data plan works, if you don't use the data plan, it moves on to next month and then next month and so on and so forth. That's how exactly our credit model works. Allows organizations to scale up and down and not limited to either a subscription or limited to the maximum capacity of the hardware. That's the complete difference in how our licensing has been redefined and have been adopted a lot by our customers.
Okay, great. That clarifies that for me at least. So I have one remaining question, and this one's going to be for Kevin. So Kevin, can you maybe talk about how did Dhruva help reduce the TCO for GulfMark?
Yeah, so as I said, it needed to be comparable to our previous spend. We actually cut our cost, I think it was around 60% from the previous spend. But when I mentioned that it lowered our TCO, it's a response to some of the other tools requiring us to host our own storage. So Dhruva, they include that storage. That terabyte that I store, that's part of my Dhruva licensing. Where for Veeam or even Cloudberry, I'm paying. Cloudberry is pretty simple. It's just S3, but I'm paying some separate cost that I have to manage and watch out for. It's a separate bill I get. So it was helpful for us to put that all together into one cost.
Okay, great. So that's all the questions we have that were submitted. So I want to thank you all for attending today's webinar. And please remember to stay connected and complete the brief survey at the conclusion of this webinar. We look forward to supporting you in current and future projects. Thank you again, everybody, and have a great day.